Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Ramped Careers Daily Update. I'm Mitch and we got Manoj here. Danny is out this week, so we're taking over and we're excited to chat with you. We're going to chat through today. How do you prepare for your first interview? So you've submitted your application, you've got the thumbs up, you've got the green light, that company wants to talk with you. Maybe your first call is a screen call, maybe it's a more in-depth 45-minute conversation with the hiring manager. Regardless, there's a couple of basic steps, basic things that we want to make sure we're doing just to prepare for that first conversation. Essentially, what it breaks down to is you need to make sure that you have a good understanding of who you're going to be talking to. So the company and the people that you'll be talking to, what do you want to actually say to them? And then what do you want to ask them? What do you want to learn about the role, about the org? So I think we'll kind of break it down into those three main buckets and those categories. You ready to get started, Manoj?
Yeah. So, Mitch, I think what I'm hearing you say is preparation is key here. Ideally, don't wing it. Winging it doesn't work. I think when people wing it, they ramble too much, and rambling is not a good sign in an interview process. So preparation is key. One of the things you mentioned is first step is like know what the company does and know what the role entails. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had conversations, first interviews with candidates, and they have no clue about what the company does, what is the product or service that the company offers, why is that product or service relevant, what are they expected to do in the role. Very little idea. And it's not a good sign, especially for entry-level sales jobs. You're supposed to be evangelizing the product or service. You're supposed to be selling it, so you need to know it. How do you go about, without knowing too much, having at least a baseline understanding of what a business does? And I know sometimes tech companies can get complicated. You may be working for some kind of a marketing technology platform, and I get it. As someone out of college, you may simply not know, or a fintech, what they do. That's the reality. How do you at least sound somewhat intelligent? What do you do to like get a pulse of what the company does?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great skill to have. You're going to be doing this every day in your job if you're trying to sell into other companies. So better to start learning it now. Here's what I do. I put on my researcher hat and I just soak up as much information. So you first start simply on Google, right? You type in the company's name, you go to their website, you go to their LinkedIn page, you go to Crunchbase, AngelList. All those websites are going to give you different pieces. Now you go to Wikipedia and you learn as much as you can about this company. When were they founded? Who were they founded by? What was the original founders trying to solve? What was the problem, the root problem that this company solves? You dig into all of their marketing pages on their website. What do they pitch themselves as? What type of value do they bring for their customer? You read through their blog, you read through their customer case studies. What are they actually solving? And this is just pure research mode, right? You're just taking all this information in, you're absorbing it. You are, what I like to do is I have like a running page of notes where I'm just copying and pasting interesting links, copying and pasting interesting paragraphs. I'm not trying to distill anything. I'm not trying to break down my pitch in my head yet. All I'm doing, I'm just absorbing, trying to get inside the mind of this company, inside of what it would be like to work for there and what are they solving for. I think that's step one. And a lot of folks miss this, right? They're trying to do too many things at once in their head. They're trying to craft their pitch. They're trying to have this perfect answer for all these questions. Just do some basic research. Just start there with the company and then go do the same thing for who you're about to talk to. If you're talking with Anna who's the sales manager, go figure out everything you can about Anna. Research her LinkedIn page, research her Facebook, Google her name, learn as much as you can about where'd she come from, what's her past, what could she want to know about, or what probably interests her or excites her. Do all that basic research first and then go back and look at your notes. I like to do all that, walk away for a little bit, go have lunch or do some other work and then come back to it and then try to distill it down and say, what's important here? What can I learn from this? And then basically what you want to break it down to, or what you want to get to. The end goal here is, can you have a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what does this company do? And then what is the problem that they solve for their customers? So kind of like a 30-second high level. This is broadly what the company does. This is their category. And then what exactly do they solve? And maybe that's 3 or 4 bullet points. Here's the 4 things that they solve for their customers. The other thing that can be helpful is go figure out who their competitors are, because you can kind of learn about the space. You can say, okay, this is their biggest competitor. This is what the competitor solves. I bet they solve something similar. You can kind of draw some conclusions there. I think that's step 1, to figure out who are we talking to.
I think it'll give people a lot of confidence too. If you feel like you've done this level of homework, homework, you'll sound a lot more confident on these phone calls. You won't sound like you're fumbling, because there's something to be said about being prepared and giving you a level of comfort that, hey, I am a peer in this conversation. I know you're interviewing me, but I've done my homework. And so I'm not going to be shaky. The voice is not going to break. And it is important. Kind of moving along that path, right? So you figured out what, about the company, about the person or the team that's interviewing you. I think another common challenge that I see a lot of fresh talent facing is they don't have a story. They don't have a story about themselves. The interesting part is everybody has a story. Everyone's interesting in their own right. It's just that there's a bit of a disconnect in finding the right words for it, in demonstrating this through words. And I feel like it's a whole that fortunately college doesn't teach. And there's resources on the internet, but it focuses on the wrong things. I see a lot of, here are common interview questions and how to answer them. And it's not interesting. I think it's not even helpful when you go through the internet and say, okay, if someone asks me, what are my strengths? Here's what I'm going to say. If someone asks me, what are my weaknesses? Here's what I'm going to say. I think that makes you a less interesting person. I think maybe at a more fundamental level, figure out what your story is. What are your thoughts on that piece, right? Where you do the same amount of research, but it's inward looking and not outward looking.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it, right? Everyone has a story. Even if you think you don't have a story, you have a story to tell. Look, I was talking with someone last week and they said the same thing to me. I don't have a good story. And we just started digging into their college experience. Turns out he worked 3 jobs during college to pay for his schooling. Now, yes, did his parents help him with some of that college tuition as well? You doesn't have to know that. You're not lying by saying I worked 3 jobs during college to pay for my college. So that's a story he can tell around, demonstrates hard work and dedication and perseverance, blah, blah, blah. Now, to your point, how do you actually tell that story without rambling and demonstrate those qualities? That makes it interesting. It makes you stand out. So I think there's 2 things to consider. One is you need to write these answers down on paper. It's one thing for me to just think about it and say, okay, here's my story. I know what I generally want to say, and then get on the phone and you're going to be in the heat of the moment. There's going to be questions coming at you. You're going to miss key points. You're going to ramble, or it's not going to sound polished. What I like to do is sit down with a notepad and pen or on my laptop, write out verbatim, sentence by sentence, what am I going to say? Just like an actor does, they have their script. Leonardo DiCaprio brings that script to life. That's your job here. It's you have your answers, you know what you're going to say, you rehearse those, and you rehearse them until they sound natural, and you can bring them to life through a story. That's your goal, especially if this is your first couple of interviews. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you can quote unquote wing it. But those people who are winging it and sound amazing, it's because they put in all that prior that they're able to do that. It's not happening in reverse there. The second thing is there is a formula for telling a good story. Manoj, you taught this to me early on. It's the same formula that marketers use. It's the same formula that Pixar uses to make movies. There's a formula. There's steps in the process to tell a good story. We've got another good video on this, but simply what it is you need to set up the story. So set up the premise, the plot of the story. It sets the context for where you are at in that time period in your life. Introduce the characters. It was me, my football coach, and my team. Those are the characters. Next, you set up the conflict resolution. We were trying to win our state championship that the team hadn't won in 50 years, and we're trying to break that drought, right? That's the obstacle you're trying to overcome. And then what is the resolution? What's the outcome? We were able to win the state championship, and we did it because we came together as a team. I pulled the team together, yada, yada, yada. You kind of wrap it up with the big theme, but there's a formula that you can follow for this, but you need to take the time, the steps to write it out, write it down, rehearse, feel comfortable speaking those words as you're going through it.
No, I think that's right. More tactically, just having a few stories that demonstrate one or more of the following. A story around when you were faced with a difficulty and you succeeded, a story around when you faced a difficulty and you failed, and what did you learn from it? That's something that people want to know. And a story around how you dealt with interpersonal conflict. I think that if you have these 3 stories nailed, there are so many variants of questions that you can answer just through stories. Have 3 experiences in mind that will humanize it, that will give people context, and these 3 combinations alone will help you answer a whole slew of questions, right? Success, failure, interpersonal conflict. 3 stories.
Yep.
Very
And here's what I see a lot, or I hear a lot is, someone does a lot of prep and they come out of the interview and they say, oh, I had all these good stories, I forgot to tell them, or I forgot how I the story into the interview. My advice is write it down before you go into the interview. I enter every interview with a notepad, pen and paper. It's even easier in a virtual world today, right? You can have that notepad next to you. You can have a doc up on your computer, have your stories bulleted out with a one-liner bullet that should jog your memory. Have your questions there also. That kind of brings us to our next point, which is you need to know what you want to say to their questions, but you need to have good questions prepared also. I think, Manoj, I've listened in on calls where you've coached some students up on asking intelligent questions in these interviews. You never want to ask something that you can just Google, right? I hate getting the question of, oh, when did you join the company? Or when was the company founded, right? That's so easy to Google. It's such a waste of a question.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around just asking interesting, intelligent questions?
The foundation of it is that it is better if your interview is a conversation than a interrogation, right? If you don't ask questions, then it's going to be a one-way street where someone will ask you questions and you answer. And people love to talk, and you have to give them an opportunity to talk. It makes it a little more free-flowing. And questions that you ask them is a tool that you have in your toolkit to convert an interview from a one-way street to a two-way conversation. Your questions can guide the pace of the interview, and your questions can direct the way in which the interview flows. And so I think that it's a good tool to have. One, it gives you an opportunity to learn more about things that you may not learn otherwise. Two, it gives the speaker an opportunity to share their story, their experience, to relate to you, to empathize with you. So I think it's a forum to use it intelligently. What not to do is ask people yes or no questions. That's another, in the same category of what's the point of it, right? Things that you can Google, don't ask. Don't ask questions that will force the interviewer to say, yeah, we do it, or no, we don't do it, right? So is there a path to promotion? It's not a great question in that sense. A better way of asking the question is, if I were to want to be an AE in your company, or if I want to be a sales leader in your company, what should I be doing? First year, my first 2 years, my first 3 years. Another way of asking this question is, tell me how someone that came in as an SDR, your most successful SDR, tell me how they got promoted to an AE and walk me through what their career path was. What is it that they did right? What do you like about it, right? That way, you'll get your answer of, is there a promotion path at the company, just through asking these questions. But it's more open-ended, and you let them tell a story. You want to trade stories. It's good because you'll get signals that you won't get otherwise. And it makes it a more interesting interview process. The last thing is kind of switching gears on the theme here is the logistical issues. There have been times where people, especially recent grads, may not know how calendar links work. They may get a calendar invite, might have a Zoom link, but they might not show up because they're expecting a phone call. Maybe that's how they think it works. Or they may not pre-install a BlueJeans or a Zoom on your computer. Sometimes you may need to do it. They may not have configured their microphone and their webcam, and they're fumbling around trying to do it. So I think it's important to kind of sort out all of the logistical issues ahead of time, practice it, download the 3 or 4 top video conferencing tools. You don't lose anything. It doesn't occupy that much space on your computer, and test it out with a friend or family. Make sure that your phone works, your webcam works, your mic works, because it just makes it for a smoother process, because you will stress out if there's, nits in the interview.
You'll stress out, and it leaves a bad first impression if you show up late to the interview because you couldn't get Zoom to work. And that's the thing, right? Just because you're not leaving your house for this interview, you still show up 10 minutes early. You're in the waiting room, you're ready to go, you have all your technology functioning correctly. And the best way, if you're confused about what's going to happen, ask. The day before, 2 days before, figure out what the logistics are going to look like. If you have any questions, shoot them an email, give them a call, ask them prior instead of 10 minutes or 2 minutes before the interview.
Yeah. So to recap, 4 steps before your first interview. Exciting. Congrats that, you did get your first interview, but know what the company does and know a little more about your interviewer. Figure out your own story. Have some quick stories that are predefined, pre-planned, pre-rehearsed in your mind that you can tweak and configure as needed. Be curious and ask open-ended questions to learn more about the company, the role, and to keep things interesting. And finally, nail the logistics. Don't let that be what comes between you and success. And we can wrap it up on that note. Good session as always.
That's it. Yep. The best feeling in the world is leaving prepared. Nice.